I'm a climate change denier. I was infiltrated in this project. You didn't know that. Yeah, there are some evidence of that. So, long list of people I've been working with. It's been a lot of fun. Sanford, thank you for your leadership. And friendship as well. John already presented aspect of climate change. He didn't remark the fact that there are extremely variable projections between different GCMs, and that create an uncertainty. Also, there are differences depending on what level of emissions of greenhouse gases you consider. So those two factors moving forward are a big chunk of uncertainty here. If you look at effect of warming in crops in general, decreasing growing season, also you have persistent temperatures about 35 degrees Celsius for, let's say, 4 days in that little cartoon there. You get 23% damage. That's just an idea. But if you have 31 degrees but a longer period of time, then you get 50%. So it has to do with the threshold of temperature, and it has to do with the persistent during the period essentially around flowering. This is data that a number of modelers, it's a group called AgMIP that is a global community of climate, crop, and economic modelers. And we published this, we have a team there that works for wheat crop. And what you see there are responses to different temperatures, mean season temperatures. And you see that the trends are very unmistakable. How this was done, essentially growing spring wheat in Arizona and planting the wheat throughout the entire year. So you will encounter all kind of weather conditions, but the response was unmistakable. Temperature would do something, especially if you were getting to the really, really hot part of the world eventually. The good thing for us, we're a temperate climate here, we are unlikely to go down the ladder there. Okay, we're going to be around the area where things don't change a whole lot. You see about the response by 20 degrees Celsius. There is another factor, which is CO2 fertilization, the fact that CO2 promotes photosynthesis. And what you see at the bottom there is for wheat data connected in this this phase experiment, which are done on the field. You increase CO2. And you can see the kind of change throughout time. So the green light is what we have in crops. It's essentially to represent that under non-stress conditions. And then you have effect on canopy conductance. Conductance start decreasing fairly rapidly, and then all these responses plateau around 950 to 1,000 ppm, which is something is reachable by the end of the century. So we may enjoy this effect as it lasts, but eventually it will fade out. Okay? Wheat production around the world is predicted to do not well. Many of the original projections were based only on temperature. People were not, putting too much focus on CO2. That has changed, and now there is a counterbalancing effect of CO2, but depends where you are. If you are in really very hot, dry, prone to drought areas, you're almost out of luck. Okay, it's very hard to, because you're going to be in that temperature regime where things will be really not good. Around here, there are several projections that indicate that things might work better. So we use computer simulation, as John was referring to. This is the only way we can have an assessment of possible futures. And you see here crop water use, for example. In the left there, if you go from up to bottom, those are different. Up is rainfall. This is the Moscow Mountain, the black at the top. And at the very bottom would be Lind and different other sites. And as you see, there's a projection of crop water use decreasing with time. There are two reasons for that. Shorter growing seasons, and the other reason is the fact that stomatal conductance is decreasing. So the crop does not lose the water so readily. If you look at the bottom, which is Lind, you don't see that effect. It seems to be growing. Lind, given the really dry conditions there, a little bit of increase in rainfall as it's expected, especially during the winter, is capitalized there. And essentially, you use all the water you have. What you're going to see in Moscow Mountain, you're going to have excess water at the end of the season for winter wheat, which is good for whatever crop comes afterwards. transpiration, the next one is transpiration itself, just the water through the crop. The first one is ET, which includes soil evaporation. And the bottom one here is transpiration use efficiency, so the amount of biomass produced per unit of water. And as you see, it would tend to increase dramatically. This is for the largest emission scenario, by the way. So on the left-hand side, winter wheat and spring wheat, that's without CO2. And as you see there, and those are yields, you see that things are not terrible. In fact, even without the CO2 effect around here, except when we start moving through a sort of three-quarter down the century, where the shortening of the growing season cannot be compensated by moving toward earlier planting. And at that point, you start having a decrease in yield. But as you see, it's nothing dramatic, even without the CO2 effect for us here. If you put the CO2 effect, which is on the right-hand side, now you see clearly a trend toward an increase in yields. That's pretty hard to fathom. That's what I'm saying. I'm a climate change denier here, right? Because this is something that seems to be we should say, we should drop worrying about climate change here. We should start thinking about how do you adapt to this, because this doesn't mean you need to adapt. There are, these are new environment, new situations you need to take advantage of. If we look at the region, we have the three colors represent the continuous crop follow transition, and then in yellow, more or less orange, is the fallow area. So that's the distribution within the REACH area. And at the bottom, you see historical. Let's concentrate in that orange at the moment. And you see that, let's say, by the 2030s, 8.5, the next one up, the bar is starting to be reduced. And if you look at the green, which is the continuous crop, the bar tend to increase about a quarter or something, or half, by in relative terms. I'm not saying half the area, by the 2070s. So these conditions that I mentioned that are relatively beneficial would help to increase the possibility for more intense cropping systems, and that's what you see there. Brian will be talking about this. This is just an idea of how we monitor. You have the blue data point there, which are chambers. The red is flax towers. And the light are simulations by CropSys. So just to give you a sense, but this is a very messy thing, okay? As you see it right there, even to measure it is pretty messy. Which one we believe? I would believe the model is in the middle, so more or less. We did other comparisons. This is ET between the ecovariance of these flax towers and what the model CropSys is predicting. See the signals there. We did the same for net ecosystem exchange. This is a CO2 exchange measured by the sensor, so you have a sense of how that works. If we look at the whole region, all those points are the different GCMs. So as you see, it's extremely messy. This is soil organic carbon emissions. They don't seem to change a whole lot throughout the century. Okay, but it's extremely messy. The lines are the average of everything there, so it's smooth out things. But if you look at one GCM, you're going to see a different story there. But that's what we see. Why? Because we are increasing temperature, which will tend to increase the CO2. Okay, but there is a reason why this behave the way it does. Future work. Certainly, we're going to continue involvement with the global community of modelers. There's a lot of activity there that is very beneficial in many dimensions. We're looking at climate change in irrigated crops. We've been doing that already. And we want to move, we're expecting a successful grant, crossing my finger, to deal with tree fruit crops. And John, you should be invited to be part of that grant also. If we get money, we'll share some with you. How about that? And then we have connected CropSys with a basin scale hydrologic model, which is VIC. And so we're able to look at the entire Columbia Basin and look at supply, demand of water as affected by climate change, droughts, and so on and so forth. So that will continue. We have work ongoing on biotic stresses. We're trying to complete the manuscript. Sanford knows about this. So there is also a disease component to this that we're starting to put together, but not completed. This is something I'm excited about. This is using satellite data. You can see the comparison there. I think the black, it was predicted from satellite data, the evapotranspiration, what I just compared with the eddy covariance. So this is just an energy balance that we're using. This based on metric developed by someone in U of I, Rick Allen. And with that, you can add simple crop model algorithms, and we can predict biomass, as you see there. And all this were done in all the different sites that we had eddy covariance for this project. Very excited about this. This would allow, regional projections of yield. We're working with Dave Hagen now on the possibility of really implementing this. See how we can do short-term projections. Maybe we can bring some elements of change, maybe for a decade, not beyond that, because it's going to be a stretch with this system. But this would allow us really, you get independent of the model. Now you're doing the real thing on the ground. You're not doing a scenario. You're doing what you see on the ground. And these are 30 by 30 meter projections, so it's extremely high resolution. Very excited about this. We'll see where it goes. So finally, the projection, everything I'm talking about here are biophysical responses. Okay, there is a weather, soil, and then the crop respond to those conditions. So socioeconomic and technology and other elements that are, will be part of the picture in the future are not part of this. So that's something that you need to look at a different approach to understand. Biotic stresses, the model does not consider those, and we know that those will be a factor. So those are caveats to think about how the implication is probably in the economic side, new varieties, so on and so forth. So despite the positive overall outlook that we're presenting here, I think there is adaptation to a gradually changing condition. Okay, it doesn't mean that, and it's going to happen. This is going to happen because this change from a century doesn't happen in a day. It happens every day in a century. And people will adapt as they go. Even the most resilient climate denier would adapt gladly if they see there are opportunities to adapt and benefit from new conditions. Okay? So, is there another one? No. I'm done. Thank you.